The perfect illusion. The fairy tale beginning. My name is Victoria Ashford, and I used to believe in fairy tales. I used to believe that love could conquer all, that good people were rewarded, and that the man who looked into your eyes and promised forever actually meant it. I was wrong about all of those things, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began, to the moment I met Marcus Holloway at that charity gala in Manhattan. It was a crisp October evening, and the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel sparkled like something out of a dream. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the polished marble floors, and I was standing alone near the champagne fountain, feeling out of place in my grandmother's vintage emerald gown. I had just inherited Rosewood Manor after my grandmother Eleanor passed away, and I was still trying to find my footing in a world that suddenly felt too big and too lonely. That's when he approached me. Marcus was tall, with dark hair that fell just perfectly across his forehead, and eyes the color of warm honey. He wore his tuxedo like he was born in it, and his smile was the kind that made you forget your own name. "You look like someone who doesn't belong here," he said, handing me a glass of champagne. I laughed nervously. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because everyone else here is trying so hard to belong," he replied, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "You're the only person in this room who looks genuine. I'm Marcus, by the way." "Victoria," I said, shaking his extended hand. His grip was firm and warm, and he held on just a second longer than necessary. We talked for hours that night, standing in that corner of the ballroom while the gala swirled around us like we were in our own private bubble. He told me about his real estate development company, about his dreams of creating affordable housing projects that would change communities. I told him about Rosewood Manor, the sprawling estate in Connecticut that had been in my family for 3 generations, and how I felt both blessed and burdened by it. "It sounds magical," he said softly. "I'd love to see it someday." "Maybe you will," I replied, and even then, I felt the pull of destiny, like invisible threads were weaving our lives together. The whirlwind romance. The next 6 months were a blur of romantic dinners, weekend getaways, and stolen moments that felt like scenes from a movie. Marcus was attentive in ways I'd never experienced before. He remembered every little detail I shared, sent flowers to my office just because it was Tuesday, and looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. He came to Rosewood Manor on our 3rd date, and I watched his face light up as we drove through the iron gates and up the tree-lined driveway. The manor stood proud against the autumn sky, its stone facade covered in crimson ivy, the gardens sprawling out in every direction like a painting come to life. "Victoria," he breathed, stopping in the circular driveway. "This is incredible. This isn't just a house. It's a legacy." I felt a warm glow of pride. My great-great-grandfather built it in 1892. Every generation has added something special to it. My grandmother's rose garden, my grandfather's library, my mother's art studio in the West Wing. Marcus walked through every room with reverence, running his fingers along the carved banisters, admiring the original crown molding, studying the family portraits that lined the grand hallway. In the library, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling books and the scent of old leather, he turned to me with an intensity that made my heart skip. "Marry me," he said suddenly. I laughed, thinking he was joking. "Marcus, we've only known each other for 3 months. "I don't care," he said, taking my hands in his. "When you know, you know. I've spent my whole life building things, creating things, but I've never felt like I had a real home until I met you. You are my home, Victoria. This place, this legacy, you deserve someone who will protect it, who will honor it. Let me be that person." Tears streamed down my face as I nodded, unable to speak. He pulled me into his arms, and I felt safe, cherished, and loved in a way I'd never known before. The grand wedding. We were married 6 months later in the rose garden at Rosewood Manor. It was a perfect June day, with sunshine filtering through the ancient oak trees and flowers blooming in every color imaginable. 200 guests filled the white chairs arranged on the lawn, and a string quartet played as I walked down the aisle on my Uncle Henry's arm. My best friend Celeste was my maid of honor, stunning in her lavender bridesmaid dress, her blonde hair swept up in an elegant chignon. She had been with me through everything, my childhood friend, my college roommate, and the sister I never had. She squeezed my hand before the ceremony began. "You deserve this happiness, Vic," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "He's perfect for you." Marcus stood at the altar looking like a dream, and when I reached him, he lifted my veil with trembling hands. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he murmured. We exchanged vows under an arch of white roses, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other until death do us part. When he kissed me, the guests erupted in applause, and I felt like the luckiest woman alive. The reception was magical. We danced our first dance to At Last by Etta James, and Marcus held me close, whispering in my ear, "This is just the beginning of our forever, Mrs. Holloway," settling into married life. The first few months of marriage were blissful. Marcus moved into Rosewood Manor, and we spent our evenings planning renovations and discussing how to preserve the estate's history while updating it for modern living. He was attentive and loving, bringing me coffee in bed every morning, leaving sweet notes around the house, and making me laugh with his terrible jokes. Celeste visited often, sometimes staying for entire weekends in the guest house. The three of us would have dinner together on the terrace, sipping wine and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Marcus and Celeste seemed to get along wonderfully, often ganging up on me playfully or sharing inside jokes that made me feel included in their banter. "You two are my favorite people in the world," I said one evening, raising my glass in a toast. "I'm so lucky to have you both." Marcus smiled and squeezed my hand. Celeste raised her glass with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, though I didn't notice it then. The business partnership. For months into our marriage, Marcus came to me with an exciting proposal. He was standing in my home office, the one that overlooked the gardens, holding a thick folder of documents. "Victoria, I have an incredible opportunity," he said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "There's a massive development project in Westchester, affordable housing combined with commercial spaces. It could change everything for my company, but I need capital to secure the contracts." "How much are we talking about?" I asked, setting down my teacup. $2 million, he said carefully. "I know it's a lot, but the returns would be astronomical. Within 2 years, we'd triple our investment. And it's not just about the money, it's about creating homes for families who need them." I hesitated. My grandmother had left me well provided for with trust funds and investments that generated steady income, but $2 million was significant. Still, this was my husband, the man I loved and trusted with my life. "What would you need from me?" I asked. "I'd need you to co-sign on the business loan," he explained, "and potentially use Rosewood Manor as collateral. It's just a formality, really. The project is solid, and we won't actually need to touch the house. But having it as backing makes the bank more comfortable." A small alarm bell rang in the back of my mind, but I pushed it away. This was Marcus, my husband, the man who held me when I cried about missing my grandmother, who promised to protect everything I loved. "Let me review the documents," I said. "I want to understand everything before I sign." His smile dimmed slightly. "Of course, take all the time you need. I just want us to build a future together, Victoria. This could set us up for life." Cracks in the foundation. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing small changes in Marcus's behavior. He was on his phone constantly, stepping out of rooms to take calls, his voice dropping to a whisper. When I asked about it, he'd smile and say it was just business stress, nothing to worry about. He started coming home later, claiming meetings with investors and contractors ran long. Some nights, he didn't come home until after midnight, smelling of expensive perfume that wasn't mine. "Long dinner meeting," he'd explain, kissing my forehead. The investors wanted to celebrate closing the first phase of the project. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. Celeste was around more often during this time, which I appreciated. She'd keep me company while Marcus was working late, and we'd watch old movies and drink wine like we used to in college. But sometimes I'd catch her looking at me with something in her eyes that looked almost like pity or guilt. Is everything okay? I asked her one night as we sat in the library. Of course, she said quickly, smiling too brightly. Why wouldn't it be? I don't know. You just seem distant lately. She reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm here for you, Vic. Always. No matter what happens. The strange thing to say lingered in my mind long after she left. The devastating discovery. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October, almost exactly 1 year after I'd met Marcus, when my world shattered into a million pieces. I had come home early from a doctor's appointment, excited and nervous about the news I'd just received. I was pregnant, 6 weeks along, and I couldn't wait to tell Marcus that we were going to be parents. I walked through the front door of Rosewood Manor, practically floating with joy, planning how I'd surprise him with the news. Maybe a special dinner in the garden, or a gift with tiny baby shoes inside. But the house was strangely quiet. Marcus's car was in the driveway, which surprised me since he'd said he'd be out all afternoon. I called his name but got no answer. That's when I heard it. A sound coming from upstairs, from our bedroom. Laughter. A woman's laughter that I recognized instantly because it belonged to my best friend. My feet moved without conscious thought, carrying me up the grand staircase, down the hallway lined with my ancestors' portraits, toward the closed door of the master bedroom. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I should have knocked. I should have walked away. But something in me needed to see, needed to know the truth even though part of me already did. I opened the door. Marcus and Celeste were tangled together in my bed, in the antique four-poster bed that had belonged to my grandmother, surrounded by the hand-embroidered pillows I'd made for our first anniversary. They were so caught up in each other that they didn't even hear me come in. I stood there frozen, my hands still on the doorknob, unable to breathe, unable to scream, unable to do anything but watch my entire life crumble before my eyes. It was Celeste who saw me first. Her eyes widened in shock, and she grabbed for the sheet. "Victoria," she gasped. Marcus turned, and for just a second, I saw something in his face that looked almost like relief. Not shame, not remorse, but relief. Like he was tired of pretending. The confrontation. "Get out," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Neither of them moved. "Get out," I screamed, finding my voice. The sound echoed through the manor, raw and broken and filled with a pain I didn't know I could feel. Celeste scrambled for her clothes, tears streaming down her face. "Vic, please let me explain. It's not what you think." I laughed, a horrible broken sound. "It's not what I think? You're in my bed with my husband, in my house, and it's not what I think." "Victoria, calm down," Marcus said, standing up and reaching for his pants with an infuriating casualness. "You're being hysterical." Hysterical? The word came out like a slap. "How long?" They exchanged a glance, and in that look, I saw everything. This wasn't a mistake, wasn't a one-time thing. This was something that had been going on for months, maybe from the very beginning. "How long?" I repeated, my voice deadly calm now. 6 months, Marcus said flatly, no longer pretending. "Since right after the wedding." The room spun. My wedding. He'd been sleeping with my best friend since our wedding. "Why?" The question came out as a broken whisper. Celeste was crying openly now.
"I'm sorry, Vic."
"I never meant for this to happen. I tried to stop it, I tried to stay away. But I love him. I've always loved him. Always." I looked between them, understanding dawning like a sick, twisted sunrise. "You knew each other before me?" Marcus had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "We met at a bar about 2 weeks before the gala. We had a thing, nothing serious. But then I met you at the fundraiser, and Celeste mentioned you were her best friend. I saw an opportunity." "An opportunity?" I repeated numbly. "For what?" He smiled then, and it was nothing like the warm, loving smile I'd fallen in love with. This smile was cold, calculating, and cruel. "For this," he said, gesturing around the room. "For Rosewood Manor. For your inheritance. For everything your family built over generations that you were too naive and trusting to protect. The ultimate betrayal." I staggered backward, gripping the doorframe for support. The business loan, the development project, was real, Marcus said, pulling on his shirt. But it's not going to make money, Victoria. It's going to fail spectacularly, which is exactly what I planned. You co-signed those documents, remember? You put up Rosewood Manor as collateral. When the project fails and the loan defaults, the bank will foreclose. And guess who's positioned to buy the property at auction for a fraction of its value? The room tilted. I felt like I was falling even though I was standing still. You can't, I whispered. This is my home. My family's legacy. It was your legacy, he corrected. Now it's going to be mine. Well, ours. He glanced at Celeste, who had stopped crying and was now watching me with something like triumph in her eyes. We tried to do this the easy way, Celeste said, her voice harder than I'd ever heard it. We thought maybe you'd just give up the house eventually, maybe move into the city, let us take care of things here. But you're so stubborn, Vic, so attached to this old pile of stones. So we had to get creative. You've been planning this from the beginning, I said, the pieces falling into place. The romance, the wedding, the business proposal. All of it was a lie. Not all of it, Marcus said with a shrug. I do think you're beautiful, and you were certainly easy to manipulate. Your desperate need to be loved made this almost too simple. Each word was a knife to my heart. I thought of the pregnancy test in my purse, the secret I'd been so excited to share. Thank God I hadn't told them. Thank God they didn't know. Get out of my house, I said, my voice shaking but firm. Both of you. Now. Marcus laughed. Your house? Victoria, you really don't understand, do you? I'm your husband. Community property laws mean half of everything you own is already mine. And once that loan defaults, the rest will follow. You should probably start packing. He walked past me, Celeste following behind him, and they left me standing in the doorway of my violated bedroom, in the house that had sheltered my family for over a century, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my entire life. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, and finally let myself cry. Great, heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in my soul. I cried for my naivety, for my broken heart, for my grandmother's legacy that I'd put at risk. I cried for the child growing inside me who would never know their father, who would be born into the wreckage of my mistakes. But as I sat there on the cold floor, something else began to stir inside me. Something hot and fierce and unbreakable. They thought I was weak. They thought I would crumble and disappear quietly. They thought they'd won. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I was an Ashford, descended from a line of strong women who had survived wars, depressions, and every kind of hardship imaginable. My grandmother hadn't raised a victim. She'd raised a fighter. I stood up slowly, wiping my tears with the back of my hand. I walked to my grandmother's old desk in the corner of the bedroom, the one with the secret drawer she'd shown me when I was a little girl. Inside were documents, letters, and a small leather-bound book I'd never fully explored. It was time to fight back, and I was going to make sure that Marcus Holloway and Celeste Turner regretted the day they ever thought they could destroy Victoria Ashford. The war had just begun, and they had vastly underestimated their enemy. The aftermath. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together in my bed, heard Marcus's cold laughter, felt the weight of Celeste's betrayal crushing my chest. I sat in my grandmother's library surrounded by decades of family history, running my fingers along the spines of leather-bound books that had witnessed generations of Ashford triumphs and tragedies. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 3 in the morning, its deep tone echoing through the silent house. I looked down at the pregnancy test I'd pulled from my purse, the 2 pink lines that represented a life I was now solely responsible for protecting. My hand instinctively moved to my stomach. I promise you, I whispered into the darkness, I will not let them take everything from us. I will fight. As dawn broke over Rosewood Manor, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I made myself a pot of strong coffee and began making lists. My grandmother had always said that panic was the enemy of strategy, and she was right. I needed to think clearly, to understand exactly what I was facing before I could figure out how to fight back. The business loan documents were in Marcus's study. I'd signed them without reading every detail, trusting my husband like a fool. Now I needed to know exactly what I'd agreed to. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors, and pushed open the door to his office. The room smelled like his cologne, that expensive scent I used to find comforting and now made me feel sick. I sat at his desk and began pulling open drawers, searching for anything that might help me understand the full extent of his deception. What I found made my blood run cold. The hidden truth. In the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a false bottom that I only discovered by accident, was a folder labeled Rosewood Acquisition. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were detailed plans, spreadsheets, and timelines documenting everything. Marcus hadn't just decided to betray me after we got married. This had been planned months before we even met. There were photographs of Rosewood Manor taken from different angles, property assessment documents, market analysis reports estimating the value of the estate and its land. But the most damning evidence was a series of emails between Marcus and Celeste, dated 2 months before the charity gala where we supposedly met by chance. From Marcus to Celeste, August 15th. Confirmed she'll be at the Plaza fundraiser. You were right about her being isolated after the grandmother's death. Perfect timing. I'll make the approach you play supportive best friend. With your history together, she'll never suspect. From Celeste to Marcus, August 18th. Victoria has always been too trusting. She thinks the best of everyone. This should be easy, but we need to be patient. The estate is worth at least 12 million. If we rush it, she might get suspicious. From Marcus to Celeste, August 22nd. Agreed. I'll play the long game. Romance her, marry her, then slowly convince her to leverage the property. Once we have control, we can orchestrate the default and buy it at foreclosure for pennies on the dollar. 1 year, 2 at most. I read through dozens of emails, each one a dagger to my heart. They'd mapped out every step of my seduction and destruction with clinical precision. They'd laughed about my naivety, joked about how easy I was to manipulate, planned their future together in my house while I was still grieving my grandmother. But there was something else in the folder that caught my attention. A newspaper clipping from 3 years ago about a woman named Jennifer Morrison who had lost her family's historic property in Charleston to foreclosure. The buyer listed in the article was a shell corporation, but I recognized the lawyer's name from Marcus's business documents. My husband had done this before, building alliances. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed the one person I knew I could trust. My Uncle Henry, my grandmother's younger brother, answered on the second ring. Victoria? 6 in the morning. What's wrong? Uncle Henry, I need your help. Everything is wrong. 30 minutes later, he was pulling up the driveway in his old pickup truck, his silver hair wild from the wind, his face creased with concern. Henry had been estranged from the family for years after a falling out with my grandfather, but my grandmother had reconciled with him before she died. He was a retired attorney who now spent his time restoring old boats in Maine, but his legal mind was still sharp. I showed him everything. The emails, the loan documents, the evidence of Marcus's previous schemes. He read through it all in silence, his expression growing darker with each page. That son of a bitch, he finally said, setting down the papers. Victoria, this is wire fraud, conspiracy, possibly even identity theft depending on how he structured those shell corporations. But more importantly, you're not the first victim. I know. I saw the article about Jennifer Morrison. Henry nodded grimly. If we can find her and any other women he's done this to, we can establish a pattern. That makes this criminal not just civil. But we need to move fast. You said the development project is designed to fail. That's what he told me yesterday. When the loan defaults, the bank will foreclose on Rosewood Manor. When is the first payment due? I felt my stomach drop. Next week, October 31st. Henry's face went pale. That's why he revealed himself now. He thinks it's too late for you to stop it. The foreclosure process in Connecticut can move quickly once default begins, especially with the property already listed as collateral. He stood up, pacing the library with military precision. But he made a mistake. He told you his plan before it was complete. That gives us a window. A window for what? My uncle smiled, and for the first time since my world had collapsed, I felt a flicker of hope. For destroying him before he destroys you. The investigation begins. Over the next 3 days, Uncle Henry and I worked around the clock. He contacted a private investigator he'd worked with during his years as a prosecutor, a woman named Sarah Chen who specialized in financial fraud. She arrived at Rosewood Manor on Thursday morning, carrying 2 laptops and a determination that matched my own. "Your uncle filled me in," Sarah said, setting up her equipment in the library. "I've dealt with men like Marcus Holloway before. They're predators who use romance as a weapon. But they always get sloppy because they underestimate their victims." "What do we need to prove?" I asked. "Intent to defraud, falsification of documents, conspiracy. If we can show that Marcus entered into this marriage with the deliberate intention of stealing your property, we can get the loan invalidated. More importantly, we can get him arrested." "How long will that take?" Sarah looked at me seriously. "Normally, months. But you don't have months. So we're going to take some shortcuts." She started with the development project itself. Within hours, she discovered that the Westchester property Marcus claimed to be developing didn't exist. The address on the loan documents was an empty lot owned by a shell corporation registered in Delaware. The supposed investors were fake names with fabricated backgrounds. The entire project was a phantom designed to justify the massive loan. "This is actually good news," Sarah said, showing me her findings. "Because it's so blatant, so obviously fraudulent. No legitimate bank would have approved this loan if they'd done proper due diligence." "Then how did it get approved?" I asked. Uncle Henry and Sarah exchanged a knowing look. "Someone at the bank is in on it," Henry said. "We need to find out who." That's when Sarah's phone rang. She answered it, listened for a moment, then smiled slowly. "We just got lucky. Jennifer Morrison, the woman from Charleston? She's been looking for Marcus for 2 years. She wants to talk." Finding the pattern. Jennifer Morrison arrived at Rosewood Manor the next evening. She was in her early 40s, elegant and composed, but I could see the steel in her eyes. She'd been through hell and survived, and she was ready to fight back. "Thank you for reaching out," she said as we sat in the garden. The October air crisp and cool around us. "I've been trying to build a case against Marcus Holloway for years, but I couldn't afford the lawyers, and the police said it was a civil matter." "Tell me what happened," I said gently. Her story was eerily similar to mine. She'd met Marcus at a gallery opening 6 months after her husband died, leaving her with a historic plantation house outside Charleston. Marcus had swept her off her feet, proposed within months, convinced her to take out a loan using her property as collateral for a can't-miss development opportunity. When the project failed and the bank foreclosed, Marcus disappeared, only to resurface months later having sold the property through a shell corporation for millions. "I lost everything," Jennifer said, her voice breaking. "My home, my children's inheritance, my dignity. He destroyed me and walked away without a scratch." "Not anymore," I said firmly. "Sarah, how many others can you find?" By midnight, Sarah had identified 4 more women. Marcus had been running this scheme for at least 5 years, targeting wealthy widows and heiresses, romancing them, marrying them, and systematically stealing their family properties. He'd made at least $30 million from his crimes, all hidden in offshore accounts and shell corporations. "We have him," Uncle Henry said, reviewing Sarah's findings. "This is a federal case. Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. We're talking decades in prison." "But what about Rosewood Manor?" I asked. "What about the loan payment due in 3 days?" Sarah smiled. "That's where it gets interesting. I traced the loan approval back to a specific loan officer at Riverside Bank named Thomas Chun. Turns out he's Celeste's cousin. He approved the fraudulent loan in exchange for a cut of the profits. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just Marcus and Celeste. This was an entire network of criminals who'd been preying on vulnerable women for years. "We need to go to the FBI," I said. "Already done," Uncle Henry replied. "I have a contact at the New Haven field office. Special Agent Rodriguez is expecting us tomorrow morning." The counterstrike. That night, I finally allowed myself to feel something other than rage and despair. I felt powerful. Marcus had made the fatal mistake of thinking I was weak, that I would crumble when I discovered his betrayal. He'd revealed his plan too early, given me just enough time to fight back. But I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. I needed them to think they'd won, to believe I was defeated and broken. So the next morning I called Marcus. "What do you want?" he answered coldly. "I want to talk," I said, making my voice sound small and scared. "Please, Marcus, can we meet? I need to understand why." There was a pause. "Fine. Tonight. 7 o'clock at Santoro's." Santoro's was an expensive Italian restaurant in downtown Hartford, the kind of place Marcus liked to be seen. Perfect. I wore a simple black dress and minimal makeup, playing the part of the devastated wife. When I arrived, Marcus was already there, sitting at a corner table looking smug and confident. Celeste was with him, her hand possessively on his arm. "Victoria," Marcus said as I approached, "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." I sat down, keeping my eyes downcast. "I don't have a choice, do I? You've taken everything." "Not yet," Celeste said with a cruel smile. "But we will. The loan payment is due Monday. Unless you have $200,000 lying around, you're going to default. Then Rosewood Manor becomes ours." "I don't have that kind of money," I whispered, which was technically true. My trust fund was substantial, but not liquid enough to access that amount in 3 days without penalties. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Then I suggest you start packing. We're moving in next month. We've already picked out which rooms we're going to renovate first." "The master bedroom," Celeste added. "We're tearing out all that old furniture and going modern. All those dusty antiques your grandmother hoarded are going to auction." I let tears stream down my face, not needing to fake them because I was genuinely furious. But they interpreted my tears as weakness, just as I'd hoped. "There is one thing you could do," Marcus said slowly. "If you sign over your trust fund to me, voluntarily transfer all remaining assets, I might let you stay in the guest house. You'd essentially be our tenant, but at least you wouldn't be homeless." "Think about it," Celeste said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It's really the best option for everyone. You get to stay near your precious family home, and we get to live the life we deserve." I looked up at them, and for just a moment, I let them see the fire in my eyes. "I'll think about it," I said quietly. As I stood to leave, Marcus grabbed my wrist. "Don't take too long. The offer expires Monday." "I understand," I said, pulling my hand away. "Goodbye, Marcus." "See you Monday, Victoria," he called after me, laughing. But what he didn't know was that I was wearing a wire. Every word of our conversation was being recorded by FBI Special Agent Rodriguez, who was sitting 3 tables away disguised as a businessman having dinner alone, gathering evidence. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of activity. Uncle Henry, Sarah, and I worked with the FBI to build an airtight case. Jennifer Morrison and the 4 other victims flew to Connecticut to give statements. Agent Rodriguez obtained warrants for Marcus's financial records, his emails, his phone records. What they found was staggering. Marcus had stolen over $40 million from 6 women over 5 years. He'd hidden the money in a complex web of offshore accounts and shell corporations, using Celeste's cousin at the bank to launder the funds. Celeste herself had been involved in every scheme, playing the role of supportive best friend to each victim, earning her trust and reporting back to Marcus. "They're monsters," Jennifer said as we sat in my library reviewing the evidence. "Sophisticated, calculating monsters." "But we have them now," Sarah replied. "Everything is documented. The fake development projects, the shell corporations, the kickbacks to the loan officer. They're going away for a very long time." Agent Rodriguez joined us, carrying a thick folder. "We're ready to move. Monday morning, we'll arrest Marcus Holloway, Celeste Turner, and Thomas Chan on federal fraud charges. But Victoria, we need you to do something first. Anything, I said. We need you to meet with Marcus one more time. Tomorrow, Sunday. Tell him you're ready to sign over your assets. We want to catch him in the act of accepting the fraudulent transfer. It'll seal the case. I nodded, my heart pounding. Where? At Rosewood Manor. On your territory. We'll have agents hidden throughout the property. The moment he accepts the documents, we move in.